Iris has consulted with over 1,000 practices and helped sell 45 clinics across the country without taking a commission. Today, we'll chat about her journey, business tips, and advice for therapists and clinic owners. Let's dive in and welcome Iris Kimberg to the show. All right. Well, welcome, Iris. We're really happy to have you here today. The first thing I kind of want to ask you is, you're an OT and a PT, which is insane.
Correct.
You were an OT first. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And for starters, thank you for inviting me on, and I
You're
appreciate the opportunity. So that is probably one of the most common questions I get asked, with the caveat of why. And it's actually a very simple answer. I was an OT first. I had no intention of becoming a physical therapist. I had started my company in my home state of New York, and I was about 2 years into my company, which was basically providing at-home services. And I was providing OT services, and then the same patients that needed OT needed PT. So I said, sure. And I had a lot of friends who were PTs, and everything was fine until one day I got a letter from the New York State Department of Professional Education telling me I was in violation of about 5 different statutes.
Yikes. That's always scary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was very scary. So it was an immediate learning lesson, and I had no idea that I was breaking any law. And this law actually still exists to this date in my state, that what they call unlike professionals, like an OT and a PT, cannot hire each other. Now, not all states have this. Yeah, it is and it isn't. I could argue it both ways.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, at the time, I was like 24 years old. I was extremely upset. I was, I wasn't a lawbreaker. And at the time, I thought that probably the best solution was to go back to PT school. Now, there were many other solutions that I now know about that I didn't really think about then. But in retrospect, it was probably the smartest business move I ever made, was going back to PT school, which I went to at Columbia. And, I think it has really served me very, very well over the years.
So did you put your career on hold then when you went back to PT school?
No. I was still working, and I was hustling quite a bit, but I got through school, and I also kept my company. I kept all my licenses, and what I usually do tell people, though, is that going to PT school made me a better OT. Which really means that, clinically, I didn't practice long in either profession. I was really much more in the business aspect almost from the beginning. But, my heart lied with OT. So, and it still does. I
was wondering that question, if you had a favorite. And I can imagine when you were treating under whichever discipline that the referral had come, it would have been hard as a PT not to use your OT brain.
I really only treated as an OT. I never actually even treated as a PT. It was purely like a business. Oh my God, I got to do this.
Yeah, I bet that was scary. I'm sure that was really scary.
Yes.
Okay. And then you developed HTA, your huge business, and got up to 700 employees. Is that right?
Correct. 700 therapists over the course of 25 years.
Oh my God.
So,
I'm like,
no, when I look back on it now,
Welcome to Connect the Dots Learning Center, Episode 2. I'm your host, Stephanie Wagers, and today we have a special guest, Iris Kimberg. Iris is a big name in therapy business consulting. She has over 35 years in this field. She's not only an OT, but a PT as well. She started HTA of New York Incorporated from scratch, built it to 700 employees, a multi-million-dollar company, and later became the go-to consultant for therapists and clinics. After 9/11, she helped rebuild OT and PT practices in New York City, and she hasn't stopped since. She's also taught at Columbia, written tons of articles, and spoken at major events, including APTA and AOTA. Iris,
I'm almost impressed with myself,
you should
but I
be.
also think that, I mean, one would have to call 25 years of growth slow growth, as opposed to like the tech industry where, I mean, a business could quadruple and then in a matter of months. But,
Right.
in an industry like ours, I mean, we're a service industry. So I think the only kind of growth you can have is slow growth if you want to maintain quality. And granted, I mean, you have a practice with 20 therapists. I'm sure it's a lot different than when you had a practice with two therapists.
Yeah.
And, the bigger you grow, and I tell this to people all the time, to therapists, the bigger you grow, so too does your exposure, so too does your risk. And
Absolutely.
the harder it is to maintain quality. It
It is.
just is,
Mhm.
and you almost have to accept, even if you build in, and I mean, and one of the things I made sure I did as I built my company, I made sure I had the support to support the growth I was doing,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
even still, it becomes very hard to keep a quality, company. And, I never wanted to sacrifice quality. And, I mean, most therapists don't, but it
Right.
can be challenging when you have, when you're that big. Yeah.
What are three things that you felt like really led to the success of your company? Because growth is hard and challenging,
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
to run
Yeah.
it for
Growth can be
25
hard. I
years.
mean, I think, it's really two main things. I saw from the beginning that I had identified a need that
Mhm.
and the need at the time when I first started my company, and needs change over
Right.
time. But the original premise of the company was that there were patients who needed services at home after they were discharged from the hospital. And
Mhm.
I was working at a world renowned rehab center in New York City, Rusk Institute, and they didn't have a home care department. And I went to my supervisor three times and said, we really should start a home care department here because these people are going home and we're not providing service. And, three times they said, oh, Iris, write a grant. I didn't know how to write a grant.
In your
I didn't
spare
want to write
time.
a grant. Right.
Right.
So I just said, I'll do it myself. And that's how I started my company. But
Right.
really, it was identifying the need. And over the course of 25 years, I mean, I identified other needs.
Mhm.
And also, I mean, really to have that kind of growth, I think you have to create something that you could easily duplicate. And I was, I saw early on that it was fairly easy to duplicate if I got a contract. As an example, I got a contract. One of my first contracts was with Visiting Nurse Service,
Mhm.
which was, a 100-year-old company that provided services to people in their home. But they had a shortage of therapists. And I said, well, look, use my company.
Right.
Use us for a week if you need us. Use us until you find therapists. And they said, okay. So we had a contract, and they started to see, gee, it's easier to call Iris and use her company than it is for us to go find therapists.
Mhm.
And I saw that it worked with Visiting Nurse. I said, well, I could duplicate this with every other home care agency. And
Right.
that's exactly what I did. And I got contracts with other home care agencies, and then, locations. Like I started in Manhattan,
Uh-huh.
one of the boroughs of the city. And it's pretty obvious that the need is not only in one borough, it's in five
Right.
boroughs. And then, as my company got bigger, I got a little bit older. The therapists that were working for me got older. And, in New York, I know you're out in California, so it may be a little different, but in New York, it's pretty common. You live in New York City when you're young. Then when you get older, you may get married, get a partner, you move to the suburbs.
Right.
So I saw my labor force moving to the suburbs. And
Okay.
I
You're
said,
like, I should.
yeah, I still worry about it. You're moving to Scarsdale, I'll open a division up there. You're
Uh-huh.
moving to New Jersey, you're moving to Long Island, don't worry. And that's exactly what I did. So I think that that's a lesson, that if you could duplicate what you've done and it's easily scalable, growth
Yeah.
can really happen. And
Yeah.
yeah, so
So it's almost like you saw barriers as an opportunity. Like instead of, feeling like, oh my gosh, my staff is leaving me. It's like, oh,
right,
they're leaving me
right.
and I can't do this. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
But look, that was a good 25 something years ago,
Yes.
even longer. And, I mean, right now, I don't know that I could problem solve quite as much as I was able to then,
Mhm.
because, at present day, there are real barriers in our industry. I
There
mean,
are.
we have a real supply and demand shortage.
Yes, we do.
And then we really didn't. And I mean, look, to some extent, there have always been deserts in our country of pockets where there's, too many therapists and too few therapists. But, I know I'm not saying anything earth shattering when I say that, following COVID, and I know in your state, because I do a lot of work there,
Yeah.
and in many states, finding staff is very difficult.
Right,
So
right.
whether I could be quite as scalable now if I was starting a company, it could be that I couldn't.
Right, right. So what was your breaking factor that kind of made you sell your company? Were you just kind of at that age where you just like, I'm kind of
Well,
done, or were you
well,
approached?
I was 43 years old.
That's
So,
young.
and I'm talking to you now, yeah, and I'm 69 years old.
Yeah.
By age 43, I had a child. I
Mhm.
had a company that was grossing $14 million, 700 therapists, and I had about 7 companies vying for my company.
Okay.
So I said to myself, you know, I've had a phenomenal run.
Mhm.
I don't know if I could grow this company anymore.
Or want
You
to,
know, I
probably, right?
Right. Well, I don't like to use the word burnt out because I don't think I was burnt out, but I
No, but
just
it
sort of
gets to
felt
be
like,
that quality piece, right? You
yeah,
talk
I,
about getting
I
bigger,
just sort of
yeah.
felt that, and I use this analogy when I talk to therapists now, it's always good to go out like with a uh, a television show. Go out when your ratings are great. Go
Mhm.
out like Seinfeld when everyone loves you. Don't
Right.
go out when, oh, no one watches you anyway. So,
Yeah,
I knew I was really at my peak of
that's
this,
awesome.
the company was very, very well, things like that. I had my pick of the litter, literally. Who should I sell my company to?
Right.
And, at 43, I mean, I knew there was a second career coming. I didn't know what, but I knew I wasn't going to be out of the game. And I also, I mean, that I strategically sold to a company that was not based in New York. And
Okay.
I sold to a Fortune 500 company that was based in New Mexico.
Okay.
And I knew instantly, like, if I sold to a New York company, they would not need me because they're also New York.
Mhm.
New Mexico, this company, they needed me to cross the street without getting killed by a cab. I mean, they were not savvy
Yes.
like a New Yorker could be savvy. So I
Right.
knew, this is
That
smart.
was smart. Yeah.
It was smart on many levels. I loved the time difference, like I could get something to them by 9 o'clock, but, I
Right.
got that time difference to my
And they're
advantage.
getting it at 5 a.m. going, wow, she's really on
Exactly.
it.
I know, exactly. So it was, and I often, another story I share with therapists, you have to be strategic about who you sell your company to,
Mhm.
especially if you want to stay with the company. Even
Mhm.
though I knew that, I mean, and like with most acquisitions, they don't want you around for too long.
Did you
Occasionally
stay for a couple years with this company?
I had a 2-year employment agreement with an option to renew on either
Okay.
party, by either
Okay.
party. They chose not to renew my contract.
Okay.
I was, those 2 years were when I was an employee of the company, it was just the nicest time,
I
just
bet.
to be,
Yeah.
it was just so freeing and fun. And, I mean,
Yeah.
it was very, very nice.
Now,
And
did you guys lose staff during that transition? I know that's a fear.
no,
No.
because they
Okay.
knew that I was around.
Okay.
And, I mean, I didn't lose any staff. I
Right.
mean, because, and they also didn't really change the company much, at least when I was still there. Now,
Mhm.
things did change when I was no longer there. But,
That's when the non-compete happened, or was that when you were working with?
well, yeah. So then, with any acquisition, and let me just throw this out there since
Yeah.
we're right now at a critical point where the non-compete clause may be leaving us effective September 4th, which
Okay.
it's being contested in court. It may not happen, but I let me go on the record to say that even if that law goes into effect, the rule, it does not apply when you sell your company.
Mhm.
So, for those of you who think you could then sell your company and then go open one next door, the answer is no. It still applies for acquisitions.
Okay.
But in any event, I had my non-compete that kicked in, and also not a bad time in my life where I got paid not to work. And I'm like, this is pretty good.
I like this.
Except,
Yeah.
yeah, except for the fact that I really miss talking to therapists,
Mhm.
which led therapists to call me, and I would just talk to them, and they tell me certain things, and I say, no, 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 don't do that, do this, try this, and one thing led to another, and I identified another need, and that was 25 years ago. That many therapists needed business advice
So
and
let me
didn't
ask
really.
you really quick
Yeah,
with that, because I know like you had mentioned therapists and calling you and kind of asking you
yeah,
questions. What
yeah.
was the common theme that you were getting over and over and over with the therapist?
Well, basically, it was therapists who, oh, Iris, I think I want, I'm thinking of starting a practice, right? I
Okay.
want to start a company like you did. Or,
Okay.
people knew very early on, you don't call Iris for clinical information. I mean, I could Google any clinical diagnose,
Yeah.
but you call Iris for business advice. But
Okay.
I'm not going to say I know the latest and greatest of how to treat any kind of condition. I
Right.
mean, I think I could do a good eval. I tell that to anybody. I think
Yeah.
any therapist should always be able to do an eval. But treatment, no. So it was
Yeah.
always business related things that people would call me about.
All right.
And, I mean, it was I I enjoyed answering the questions, and then I
Yeah.
said, gee, this is exactly what I want to do,
Okay.
and that's really how I started consulting, that. And, unfortunately I lived downtown, and I was like 6 blocks from the World Trade Center after
Mhm.
9/11, and 14 practices were decimated by the terrorist attack. And I was highly committed to
Yeah.
helping these practices get back on their feet. And that helped. That was my other thing of, let me consult to these practices to help
Yeah.
them get back
Right.
in some
Right.
capacity. It was really the non-compete plus the 9/11
Mhm.
that converged, and
Got
and
you
then
going.
before I knew it, I was working again. So,
And you're like, hey, wait a minute, how did this happen? So,
yeah.
what is kind of a common thing that you either see or wish therapists knew before they? Because I feel like everyone wants to start a practice. New grads are coming out and they're going to start
Yeah,
their own practice.
right,
And
right,
there's a lot to know. What do you see or wish they
yeah,
knew before doing it?
yeah. Well, what I what I really see, and I mean this in the kindest way, like, you know, I see a lot of therapists, and I use this example of imposter syndrome versus imposter. So if a therapist has imposter syndrome, you know, they may have the right skills, but not feel like they do. So they could feel like it's a syndrome that they're, like an
Right.
imposter. But some therapists actually could be imposters because they come out of school. I mean, to me, and I taught at Columbia for 12 years, I
Right.
still believe you can come out of some of the best schools in the country and still be extremely, extremely entry level.
Absolutely.
So, maybe you do feel like an imposter if you think that you could graduate from school, either demand a $95,000 salary and or start a
Mhm.
private practice without the basic fundamental skills. I mean,
Mhm.
school gave you
They
very,
don't,
very
right. They
borderline
don't teach you how
basics.
to manage employees, any of that.
Yeah, right. So
Yeah.
I mean, it really, my first words of advice to people are, don't quit your day job, but it really should be, get your day job,
Get your
and
day.
then,
It's an experience.
unfortunately, and this doesn't happen in all places, but, sometimes it's concerning that therapists could get jobs, but it doesn't mean they're actually getting that hands-on training, mentorship,
Mhm.
supervision. I mean, not only from the business, forget about the business end. I mean, to me, you could actually learn most business skills, and, but before you hold yourself out to the public, what are you holding yourself out as?
Right.
You know, I mean, I would feel naked if I held myself out as, oh, I'm an early career, no more new grad, early
Right.
career therapist, with 1 year experience.
Right. Why
And
should I come to you? Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
why should you even hold yourself out to the public, you know?
Mhm.
And honestly, don't quit your day job, or do get a day job where you could actually get the experience that you need, so that then you could feel like, even so that then you know what, I thought I was passionate about hands, but it's really peds I love, or it's
Mhm.
really whatever it is,
Mhm.
because you know it's pretty hard to be successful and not be passionate about what you do. I mean, I
Absolutely.
see it all the time.
Yeah.
It goes hand in hand. I mean, it's pretty logical, but not everyone. I mean, people
Yeah.
think, if someone says to me, "What should I go into private practice for?" I'm like, well, I can't really be. I should not be
What
the
do you
one
like
answering
to do?
that question.
Right.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, I got to throw that back at you,
Yeah.
because it has to come from within you.
Yeah.
Which I say about many things. Like, I could write a business plan for just about any therapist,
Mhm.
but I make them do a draft of their business plan,
Mhm.
so that their fingerprint is on it, not just mine, because
Yeah.
ultimately it's going to be their company, not my company. And it has to have at least the essence of them and the flavor of them,
Mhm.
even if I sprinkle the good stuff, in it,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
You have a quote on your website that says trial and error is not a business plan.
Yeah, right.
I love that. Tell me more about that. Like, did that come
Yeah.
from like experiences or things that you're
That
seeing?
that came straight from my experiences.
Okay.
At the time when I started, I probably was one of the members of like the first generation of private practice owners,
Mhm.
you know, going back like 40 years, or,
Yeah.
even a little bit longer. I mean, there were people in private practice before I went into private practice, but it wasn't as common as it is now.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I literally did learn. Look, I broke the law. I mean, I learned by trial and error,
Yeah.
and the difference is that then I could get away with it, in the sense that, and I got that horrible letter from the state ed department. I mean, I'm calling them up hysterical crying.
Right.
Now they're not going to wipe away my tears. I
No.
mean, they'll make me a poster child. And,
Right.
that's a very big difference. So, I tell people all the time, I didn't know is not a defense.
Yeah. Ignorance
So
is not
people tell me
innocence,
that, well,
right?
I didn't know. I said, well, I'm glad I'm telling you, because I didn't know is not a defense.
Mhm.
And, and trial and error is no way to run a business now.
No, and
And
there's so
maybe,
many laws and nuances and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And also, it's more expensive. I mean, mistakes could, you could learn from mistakes. I get that.
But they're
And
costly.
exactly. And certain mistakes, could be almost unforgivable. And others, you could sort of say, oh, I got, not that I got away with it, but the outcome was not that terrible. But,
Right. You
I think,
changed the way you're running your practice
right,
and
right. But
yeah.
I think now there's enough, look, there's enough resources. I think one of the issues now is that therapists have to be a little bit savvy about the resources that they select and they
Absolutely.
choose to follow. I mean, just before I came on to talk to you,
Mhm.
I was on a Facebook group,
Oh, I
and
know. It's just so
I
scary, isn't
just
it?
read a thing about the non-compete, and they said, "Oh, the non-compete started in May. Don't worry about it." So it's like right before I got on, I had written an article about it. I had a
Mhm.
poster on my website. I just sent them the link. I said, actually, it's the ruling was in May. It's going to be effective September 4th if there are not legal challenges. So, I mean, trial and error is not a good business plan. Finding information is important, but it's also using your own filter to make sure, am I finding the right information?
Right.
And it's pretty scary what's happening in our industry to some extent, with people holding themselves out as quote unquote coaches, consultants, whatever you want to call them. I don't care. But I hope that they have their facts together, And I hope people realize that, the same way a patient goes to a doctor and may interview a few doctors to say, oh no, I want to, this is where I'm getting my second opinion. That therapists should be that savvy when they're thinking about who should I rely on to help me build this company, or who should I rely on, for problem solving, or a second look, or something.
Right.
And certainly don't believe everything you read on Facebook or Dr. Google or Google, because
Absolutely.
yeah,
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 it is scary that people, I will see that too. They'll throw out codes. Oh, you can just build this code for that.
right,
And
exactly,
like, I just want to shoot my arm
exactly.
off. I don't say anything, but no.
Right. Well,
So
sometimes I can't help myself and I say, all right, I'll go on my soapbox for 2 minutes and then get off.
then get off, right? Yeah.
It depends how egregious the comment may be, but something like that. I didn't want someone to think, oh, free and clear. I don't have to worry about my non-compete because it's over. No,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Can we talk about industry trends for a second? Maybe like more related to kind of pediatric practices. Like, in my practice, I've been running it for 10, almost 11 years, and it's getting harder to find therapists. They're wanting more money because education costs more and reimbursement just keeps going down. And with the Medicaid population, we can't charge no-shows. So it's like this, how do you keep this boat afloat when there's holes in it?
I mean, look, unfortunately, there are certain, when I, let's say, work with a therapist or look at a practice, let's say, whether it's for sale or someone's sinking or, whatever, or even if they're healthy, which is
Right.
also nice. You look at what are your vulnerabilities, what are your strengths, and one of the main things is what can I control and what is totally out of my control. So
Mhm.
something like Medicaid, can you control the rate? Yes or no? Can you, so there's certain things that you can't control. Okay. If you can't control something, then what's my workaround? Whether that means that unfortunately I can no longer accept Medicaid because, some of my favorite words are it's not fiscally viable. That doesn't mean I don't think that the Medicaid population, I could plug in other things beside Medicaid. There are practices that can't afford the $65 that United Healthcare may be giving them, or
Mhm.
even, if it becomes fiscally impossible, you have to make it a business decision that it's not viable anymore for me
Mhm.
to do that. I
Mhm.
mean, I've helped therapists change entire business models because they needed to get back out from underwater, and
Mhm.
there's an enormous amount of challenges right now. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I'm so busy with practice acquisitions, because the number of therapists who want to sell their practice, and I
Yeah.
don't blame it, I hope that every therapist that has a private practice or some sort of company gets to the point where they say, I have built something of value. It's just the same way you build a home, you renovate it, you keep it good, and someday you're going to reap the benefit of that. That I
Mhm.
look at a practice as an asset, and
Mhm.
that this is an asset that you built, and that I hope you could reap the benefits of what of the rewards of what you've done for the last, for you, in your case, 11 years. Sometimes
Right.
it's 25 years,
Right.
whatever. Um, and, I would have to say that since COVID, more people are, either, people had the aha moment or they decided, God, whereas I could argue to them, look, you survived a pandemic,
Right. We figured it out,
you
right? We
know,
totally transitioned healthcare on
exactly.
a dime. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So that is a feather in your cap. And that is something that you could look at, that you have built in inherent value in your company by virtue of the fact that you survived the pandemic. So maybe
Mhm.
the reaction should not be, oh my God, I could never do that again. Whether you could or you couldn't, you
Mhm.
know, it was a moment of strength, not weakness, but it also did lead to more people wanting to sell,
Mhm. Just got
what
hard.
I, unfortunately or fortunately, and I could argue most things true on both, in both directions. But the amount of therapists that want to sell, let's say, to private equity backed firms or multi-state firms, as opposed to, I mean, my favorite kind of sale, honestly, like you have 20 therapists, I'll use you as an example.
Okay.
If there was one therapist in your practice that you said, Iris, I'd love to sell to Sally,
Mm-hmm.
that would be that's my favorite,
Right.
And I call that an internal sale. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's three, whatever. But oftentimes it can't happen because there's no funds available, et cetera, et cetera. And then you look outside the practice and, some practices are actually worth too much money for anybody but a private equity firm or a multinational firm or a hospital to buy, and, is this going to be the wave of the future? Well, when a multi-state company buys a practice, the rate of reimbursement that they get and that they negotiate is very different than the rate of reimbursement that you may get. So automatically, I'll keep Medicaid aside. I'll use United Healthcare, and I'm not really picking on them. I could use Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna,
Any of them.
but the rates that a bigger group will negotiate is far different than what you will have negotiated. So they could look at your books and you could say, look, I'm barely turning a profit, and they know that their margin is a good 20% or even 10% more than yours.
Mm-hmm.
And that can make all the difference in the world right to your bottom line. Do I see that as a trend in the future? To some extent, yes. That I think that more practices will be owned by bigger companies and fewer will be owned by individual therapists. Yet there will always be bubbles in our country, like pockets where, and I'll use my hometown of New York City. I mean, and I love my hometown. I love my OTs and my PTs, but we have an overabundance of private practices. I mean, oh my God, we have quite a number. But the population supports it, the demographic supports it, the money supports it, and, and some of them are doing very, very well despite all of the, the barriers and all of the problems. And I believe there will always be pockets where these kind of practices could thrive and survive and will continue. But, I can't say that for the overwhelming majority of the country. Like even though like I work with some practices in Alaska and Hawaii.
Okay.
Shocking how well these practices. Shocking. Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, I should come do a site visit, which I never do, but it's like, I want to go to Alaska. I want to go to, I think and I say that as a joke because I never actually get up there. But, and you would think, I mean, the practices are really profitable. They're good. They're in beautiful locations, It doesn't mean they're easy to sell because you have to find someone, who wants to move to Alaska and Hawaii, and there should be somebody out there who does. But like a multinational company might say, I don't know that we were thinking of opening a branch in Alaska. Like, I'm not so sure about, so
harder to staff.
Exactly. Or I don't know if we want to just staff it and think we're going to have travel therapists meandering in and out, things like that, even though those practices are not always staffed by travel. But, I mean, it's really, there are so many factors that go into all of this. I mean, I think, going back to your question, it's very important to look at trends, and I say this, like, you can't just look at your neck of the woods. Look at what's happening really regionally and also nationally. Like, you're from California, I'm from
Oregon. Yeah.
Oh, you're from Oregon. All right. West Coast. Close.
West Coast. Same thing. Yeah.
Well, I have found historically that things start on the West Coast and roll across the country and finally get to the East Coast. So managed care. That did not start in New York and roll out to California. It started in California, and it took a good 5 years to roll to New York. Why did I sell my company when I did? Besides the fact that I thought I grew it enough.
Yeah.
Managed care was coming across the country. Yeah. And I'm like, oh my God, they're going to literally manage the care that we provide. So my company's going to go from being like freewheeling, You need PT 4 times a week for 40 minutes. Great.
Right.
You need OT oh, no. It's 2 times a week for 30 minutes for 2 weeks. And then, and I wasn't a clairvoyant. I literally was tracking trends because I was following what was going on around my country, not only in my neck of the woods. And I think therapists really need, like, it's a very good example now with ABA and floor time. Not happening in every single state, but every pediatric therapist, and I'm not talking about whether I like ABA or floor time,
but it's happening
from a purely business point of view. You should be following the news to see that, gee, the trend seems to be changing, that, ABA is no longer like the poster child, and it's losing, a lot of following. And all of a sudden people are saying, gee, floor time looks like it's producing good results. And,
right. Yeah.
So when therapists say to me, Iris, I'm thinking about starting a floor time program, I'm thinking, now that's a great opportunity. The same way when therapists, not only in peds, like, therapists, like after COVID, there were so many opportunities. If you looked at the trends, like it would only stand to reason after COVID, when family members were kept apart from nursing home family members and people in the I couldn't see my grandma for a year. Well, it's pretty logical that the trend's probably going to be that less people may be going into nursing homes and assisted living facilities. So bingo, if you're going to do something, providing services at home, that's a good thing,
Right.
Things like that, just being aware, like, I mean, not just being so narrow in scope, but looking at the big picture and looking at other industries. Like, I mean, I'm such a fan of looking at, like, right now, there's so much with aging and, and universal design and, and now beauty companies are like, oh, we want everything to be easier and this and that. Well, if that is an OT 101, I don't know what is. And now my push is to help OTs. You be on the board of that company so that you could really show them how to make underwear that, is easier to put on, or how to make lipstick, or how, that kind of thing. And the trend is that, that this is the direction of where products are going, that this is another market that they want to reach, that people are getting older and staying older. So, I mean, it's really, we're so lucky because from peds to adults to geriatrics, there's so many opportunities.
There are. OT's so adaptable. We just need to adapt ourselves to fit the trend instead of just writing it out and not
and put ourselves in the equation.
I mean, how can we fit here? What niche is missing here? Yeah.
Right. Which, I mean, to me, I think, it falls on us to do a lot of that. I mean, I think, and I'm not here to bash the AOTA or any, but their direct to consumer approach. And because I get to live also in the world of PT, there's just a world of, and that has its share of problems, but the PT's direct to consumer approach from the national level versus the OT, there's no comparison, and, I mean, I will forever say, therapists, we're very lucky in my head, because I always say we see what others don't, like, it's like when we look at something, I mean, and I look at something in such a convoluted way, like I'm interested in something, I don't know what it is, because then it's like, well, I can make it into a that, and it's like,
well, that could be.
Exactly. So it's, I mean, it's sort of like the way your brain is wired, but to be able to, and I think I consider myself a little fortunate that I could be wired like that and then say, gee, I could be wired like that. I could think a certain way. And I could also, have become financially very successful without really losing any of my core values.
Yeah.
And,
that's amazing.
I can't complain about any of that, really.
Yeah.
And I mean, my goal now is like, let me help other therapists, reach whatever is successful to them, and success is so relative. And it's the first thing I don't care if you hire 7 therapists. I don't care if you stay a solo practitioner. It's really what I mean, it's really what your goals are, and you know,
You mentioned like tailoring, kind of like consulting to the individual therapist. And do you feel like it's really finding out what their measure of success is or their goals and then tailoring it to
well,
them
I mean,
instead
I
of
think
like,
that's
uh,
one of the things, I mean, if I had had a consultant working with me, which I didn't. I was so trial and error, and they said to me, what do you want to, where do you envision a success? I could not have answered that question.
yeah,
I mean, this was an experiential learning. And I think a lot of businesses still is experiential learning. And you don't know how much you're going to grow until you grow. I mean, I've had therapists come to me, oh, Iris, I just want to be able to find someone for vacation coverage so that I can go away with my family 2 weeks.
yeah,
And I said, okay, that's one approach. I said, one thing we have to remember, I mean, by the time I was 43, I had been a practicing therapist for 20 years. That's a long time, but
mhm,
most of us can't retire by the time we're
no,
43. So what else are you going to build into your company? So I could tell that therapist, you may want to consider a little bit more than vacation coverage
mhm,
because you're going to be as you get older, what you're going to want to do, what you're going to be able to do, it shifts.
yeah,
And that's why, to me, exit strategy, exit planning, you know, the oldest therapist I worked with was 83 years old. And
wow,
in my head, I thought to my, and she was very accomplished hand therapist. And at the time, I said to myself, God, I wish she came to me when she was 73, but the
yeah,
truth is, she really should have come when she was 53.
uh-huh,
And, and I work with therapists, of all ages. And, and I tell people, look, you could be 45 and want to sell your company. And I say, I was 43 when I mean,
mhm,
because it means you probably have been doing this for a good 20 years or
mhm,
15 years or 25 years. And, you've reached, take me out of the oven, I'm done
right,
moment. And,
yeah.
there's absolutely nothing wrong with that,
Mhm.
at
What
all.
would be your advice to clinic owners, as far as thinking about getting out of practice, wanting to, like, how long do you need to prep to sell your practice? I know you could probably do it right away. You're not going to probably have the best offer, but what steps do
Right.
they need to
Well,
take?
no one could do it right away. I mean,
Mhm,
I tell people at least think 6 months. But
mhm,
I really I just closed a deal 2 days ago. And the therapist said to me, Iris, this was our anniversary. We started working together a year ago. I said, yeah. I said, you're right. And I've worked with therapists on identifying a buyer and getting a deal to close, that sometimes it can take a year because it can get very complicated. Other
mhm,
times but what I really think that people need to do is start to think about long before, like someone sent me an email today, I'm in the planning stages, but I'd like to sell, let's say within 3 years. And to
mhm,
me, that's like perfect because now you should be thinking about is what am I building in my practice that's of value? Like, what are the value makers? Because it should be a value maker to you and to whoever the party is that's going to be purchasing your company. So,
mhm,
I mean, and sometimes the two are mutually exclusive, but they really shouldn't be. Like, if it's a value to you and your company, it stands to reason it should be valuable to the person, to the
right,
entity who will end up buying. But you really have to look at your practice and say, what are my value makers? What are my value takers? What could, like waiting lists. I used to have therapists tell me, oh, well, waiting lists show how busy we could be. I said, yeah, except that waiting lists will show a buyer, look at all the lost opportunity in this practice. What are they doing? Are they having especially now? Like I do everything I can to try to help a practice before we go to market. We got to work on your waiting list because
mhm,
it looks bad. It looks like you've got a staff shortage. It looks like, because
mm.
usually,
What do you do with that though? Because there is a staff shortage.
well, I mean, look, I have done everything from being, we have what's called active waiting lists where therapy practices hire therapists to just do virtual intakes to talk to the family to say, look, we're waiting to, get you on a slot, blah, blah, blah. We just want to, I want to meet your kid. I want to meet you. I want to get you started on some sort of program so that you're not just sitting idly by. Or let's say summertime. I mean, this just came up 2 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
We know certain families are going to be away for 2 week periods, 3 weeks periods in the summer. If there's a family on a waiting list that understands, look, we can get you in for a 2 week period. We can't give you that slot permanently, but we could at least get you started. Well, to me, that's an active waiting list. And it serves, it's good for the practice, but it's also
Right.
good for the family,
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, look, value takers are when you're understaffed, there's no doubt about it. I don't have the cure for that, even though, look, there are certain ways to try to encourage retention of staff, recruitment, retention, but it's a challenge. Especially now, but, yet some practices manage to keep staff. And, I think part of my success, even though it was a different time period, is that I was, I always felt like the therapist, like I treated the therapists like they really were the essence of my company and
Right.
the most important stakeholder,
Mm-hmm.
because they are. I mean, we're a human capital industry.
Your biggest opportunity, your biggest threat, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Without them, you'll have nothing. So, and I think that most practices realize that. And I think I've certainly seen a shift in many that really acknowledge the value, here's one other example. Like, when therapists always talk to me about raises and everyone wants so much money and blah, blah, blah. And then they throw in their productivity standards and things. And I said, maybe you have to look at this also a little differently. Maybe your most valuable therapist is not the one that does the 13th patient of the day, because I wouldn't want to be your 13th patient.
Right.
But maybe the most valuable therapist is the one that actually brings you a new referral source or does a new program in your practice that will then bring other things of success to your company. To me, that's the therapist that gets the merit raise. But
Right.
It's not just productivity. What is this person contributing to my practice, and how could I reward them?
Mm-hmm.
And
good point. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's challenging.
it's a sort of a different way of looking at certain things.
Right. Right. So kind of in your experience, when you think about like deals that you've kind of brokered or whatever you want to call it, what has made it consistently fall apart? Kind of what are those loose
The deal
screws?
fall apart. Well, I'm going to be honest. Most of the deals go through.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but what could make a deal fall apart or not happen?
Yeah.
The biggest one is the therapist who thinks that their practice is worth more than it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like the rude awakener that, and I'm the first. When I do my work, I do not get paid a commission, and I do that on
It's
purpose
amazing.
because I often know the buyer and the seller. I don't want there to be any conflict of interest, and but if someone's not realistic about a price, it's not going to happen. And sometimes therapists get in their own way. Other times, uh, I actually I've been doing this long enough to realize that I have started to pay a lot more attention to how good a match the practice is with the company acquiring the practice or the owner. And I've done some mismatches in deals, like, a company from the South bought a practice in the North. I didn't think that was going to be a civil war. And I'm not saying it was a civil war, but there were some definite culture clashes that and we worked through them and it worked out. But it was like, and I'm not saying that only the North could buy the North, but what it really meant is that we had to do a little bit more work.
Mm-hmm.
So now, one of the first things I also talk about is post-acquisition culture. Like, what's the plan? What's the strategy after the acquisition to make sure that we've got a good, seamless transition?
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to say those words. It's a little harder to do those words.
Yeah.
And I myself have become, like, I put that at the forefront now whenever I'm talking to anybody, just to make sure that, that it's going to be smooth sailing afterwards. Rarely, I've yet to ever see real buyer's remorse or seller's remorse. That
Okay.
doesn't mean that therapists don't, feel emotionally bad, but also emotionally great. I mean, it's a very
Yeah.
mixed kind of emotion kind of thing.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But most deals do not fall apart. I mean, maybe occasionally if someone is looking for financing and they don't get the financing, or, you know,
Hmm.
a horrible audit comes up in the middle of something, there could be these little things, but for the most part,
They stick it
deals
out.
do happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just kind of getting your ego out of the way, right? And just looking at the practice.
Well, without a doubt,
Yeah.
because you have to answer the question, can this practice exist without me? And
Right.
even if you want to say, of course it can. Like I am my practice. It's the first thing you have to say, of course it can.
Yeah.
And it honestly should be able to.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the things of getting ready for an acquisition is to pull yourself out of the equation a little bit. Don't be the only decision maker. Like let
Hmm.
other people, don't just lead from the top down. Show them that there's other people in your company that can make decisions, that that it's not only about you, it's about your company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You've given some amazing nuggets. I love it. Any
Thank
other
you.
kind of parting advice that you can give to, kind of either a therapist or a practice owner in pediatrics?
Well, look, eh, to me, what I love the most about peds, honestly, you could start with a baby that's a week old, and you may actually be able to work with that kid till they're 18 years old.
Hmm.
So as opposed to an adult practice where we're much more the turnover, it's like, all right, now I need my next total hip or my next this or my next. There's something about peds, and it's the nature of peds, to be able to, and I'm not saying that all practices can do this, but there are practices that, offer, like, why should I stop working with the baby when they're 3? I'll go from EI to preschool contracts. I'll go from preschool contracts to school age contracts. Then what about the middle schoolers with executive functioning? I mean, to get, if we call that customer acquisition, the fact that you could acquire a family at the beginning, that's why I always tell therapists, like, and they complain, oh, it's so much time to talk to the family, to find out about their insurance and do that. I said, you are making an investment in a family. I don't care if it takes you 2 hours. You could have that family for 10 years. You
Right.
tell me if that's worth the investment. You will
Right.
get your return on your investment of time,
Absolutely.
and especially in pediatrics, and
Mhm.
I mean, people who know me, I mean, I am a big fan of saying, look, you have to charge for your time. You can't just, but especially at the beginning, if your intake,
Mhm.
that is money well spent because
Absolutely.
you're cultivating a relationship. And,
Mhm. Yeah.
look, I think pediatric therapists have endless opportunities, for the future, no matter what, I mean, staffing shortages aside, but, I mean, I feel for people at the moment, because
Mhm.
I think that, and we may just be in a holding pattern for a while where, your profitability will suffer, but your staffing will be intact, which is far smarter. Like, I would rather you show less profitability, because remember, someone coming in to buy you could say, oh, well, we know we get 10% more per visit. So even the margins, we know we're going to do better financially once we own this company,
Yeah.
but it's a fully staffed company. I mean,
Right.
I
They
think
don't have
that
to look for people. Right.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
That's
Because
good
with that,
information.
yeah,
Yeah. Well,
okay.
what is next for you in your endeavors? I
Well, when I turned 65, I said to myself, I wonder if I should retire, like I'm 65.
thought you were
And
going to say you were going to go to speech school. I was like, oh my God.
no. But when I turned 65, I didn't answer my phone or my email, or I went offline, off the grid for 4 days. And
Yeah.
and I celebrated, et cetera, et cetera. And I came back to so many phone calls, messages, this and that. I said, oh, no. I'm still very relevant and people still need me.
Yeah.
And, now I'm going to turn 70 next year. And I still feel that way. Like I enjoy what I'm doing, and
Yeah.
I also get to pick and choose.
Right.
There have been times that therapists will want to work with me, and I'm like, I'm not the best fit for you
Yeah, it
because
doesn't
I
work for
either
you.
don't. Well, I don't. Certain things. It's like no, I
You
can't
have to,
support
it
that
has to
business
fit.
model or that. Yeah. So but I mean, I still envision as long as I feel relevant and useful and purposeful that you know
Hmm.
I mean, the beauty is I could do what I do from a lot of different places.
Yeah,
And people don't necessarily have to know where I am. And
right.
especially since COVID, where no one cares if they meet with you in person or not
I
anymore.
know,
I mean,
right?
that makes my life a whole lot easier.
Yes, it does.
So,
Yeah, yeah. So how can people find you? Where would they go to like connect with you for your services?
well, you could go to my website.
Okay.
I still call it NewYorkTherapyGuide.com.
Okay.
Iris at nytherapyguide.com. You could Google me and up will come all my contact information. I'm fairly easy to find, you
Okay.
know.
I'll put it all in the show notes. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
awesome.
but I'm pretty easy to find, I have to say. So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
thank you. I really appreciate your time today,
yeah.
your wealth of
You're more than
information.
welcome. It was a lot of
Yeah.
fun talking. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again,
Yeah.
Stephanie.
Thank you, Iris.
Okay. Have a good night.
You
Okay.
too. Bye bye.